Hello, everybody. Welcome. I thought what I might do is talk about what I would talk about in class via this screencast instead. Please pardon my occasional lapses, but let me go over this voting with the buttons application. I wanted to make sure that we covered some common ground with that. So, one of the things that we have to do now is we have to create Java files that have multiple files, Java programs or solutions that have multiple files. In this case, we're going to need to create two files, a votecounter.java and a votecounterpanel.java. As we'd mentioned last time in Java, you can sort of think about the standard model of GUI development in Java as consisting of three basic elements: component objects, event objects, and listener objects. And we're going to get to see all of them in action in this one simple program. Most of you have already worked on it, so I wanted to make sure you're well familiar with it before I point out some of the more important elements. So in this case, oh, by the way, one other quick point. Remember that component objects can be further classified into container objects, which are components that hold other components. The other components they hold are usually screen elements like buttons, text fields, radio checkboxes, etc. Radio boxes, checkboxes, etc. So I've already got NetBeans running here. So let's start a new project. That's what we're going to do, right? And the new project will be called probably Vote Counter. I can call it whatever I want. I'll call it Test Lab or some such thing. So that way we organize all our files in there. I've also installed a Python interpreter. So we'll say we want to create a Java application library. That's first. And it says, okay, name the project. We'll call this our Test Lab 5. Why not? And we'll tell it, we'll let it create the main class. Let it dump that in for us. We're going to override that anyway. So it's created the Test Lab 5 project. Within that, it has this lowercase Test Lab 5 package, and that's just a folder. Remember in Java, that just means folder. And it's created this file in there with a default main. So it's added a bunch of scaffolding for us. We can essentially ignore most of that scaffolding. It's not going to be very useful for us. We could rename this if we wanted to, but I think I'd rather create a couple of new files. The first new file, I'll come back to the lab, and it says, okay, first thing you got to do is create votecounter.java. And we can see that votecounter.java just consists of a main method, nothing else. So that means this is our driver application. This is the point of entry into our program, and this is where execution will start. And execution will start by creating a Jframe object. A Jframe is a container component. That's one of those that we'd mentioned. And it creates a new Jframe and gives it a name. Remember, a frame is a window frame, just like we saw in class. And it tells that frame object, which we just call lowercase frame, that, hey, you know what? Set your default close operation. And then it gets its content pane. The content pane is like the glass part of a window, and you can add stickers onto it. Stickers in our case will be some screen elements. One of those screen elements is going to be this new vote counter panel. Once we've added it, and I'll talk about that, this actually creates a new vote counter panel object right there. Once it adds that to the content pane, then it just packs it up and makes it visible. But what is the vote counter panel? Well, we'll find out in just a bit. Let's create this class first. So the class that we want to create is vote counter. So I'll copy that, go back to NetBeans, and I'll say, let me add a new file. The new file will be a Java main class because it's got a main method. And I'm going to add that in project test lab 5. And the name of that will be vote counter. It's in package test lab 5. Great, add it in. There it is. So it's created our vote counter class, and it's given it the default main method with nothing in it. And we need to now copy our code over. So here's our code for this guy. Oh, I should open this up in Adobe, right? We talked about how the PDF renderer in Firefox is a little unreliable at times. So opening it up in Adobe makes the copy and paste a little bit easier. And since there's a little illness going around, the easier we make things for ourselves, the better. All right, and I think I need to switch to this thing. There we go. All right, let me snag that and come back to NetBeans and pop it in there. Once I've popped it in, one of the things I like to do is choose Control A and then Source and then Format, so things are nicely formatted. Now I've got a couple of issues. It says, first of all, it's going to say, I don't know what the Jframe is. We know from here that, it needs to know exactly where Jframe is. It's in the swing package. But if we just left click this, we can say add the appropriate import, and it adds that in for us. Now we've got one other remaining error, and it's saying I can't find this symbol vote counter panel. It doesn't know how to create a new vote counter panel object because there's no vote counter panel class that's built into Java. This is something we need to create. And that's the second class. That's this class over here, the vote counter panel class. This extends JPanel. Extends is Java's way of doing inheritance. That means it inherits all the abilities of a JPanel. And a JPanel is a container object. That means it's a component object that acts like a container. It itself is invisible, but you can stick a bunch of other components onto it. You can add a bunch of other components onto it, and those components are usually screen elements like a button or a JLabel. And that's what we're going to add onto that. So we need to create this vote counter panel class. So we'll go back to NetBeans, pardon me, and we'll say, let me add another file. I'm going to add a regular class, not a main class this time, because vote counter panel is our worker class, not our driver class. And we'll give the class the name, vote counter panel, and it tells me exactly where it's going to create it in that package at that location on the hard drive. We'll say finish, and it pops it in. Thank you. I just got a notification from Alexa. Ignore that. So once I've added in the vote counter panel, now I need to go back and add in the imports. These are the imports that I'll need from the AWT. Remember we talked about the AWT, the Abstract Windowing Toolkit, and Swing as well. So I'll add those import preprocessor directives over here. Oh yeah, it's saying unused import. That's fine. We're going to use it in a bit. And now we also need to have the vote counter panel extend JPanel. So right now it thinks that vote counter panel is just a standalone class, and we need to tell it, no. What we want you to do is to inherit all the default abilities of a JPanel. So that way we don't have to recreate all that functionality. It's like if you wanted to create a new offspring, so you wanted to create a new son class. What you do is you'd say inherit all the abilities from the parent so that you don't create a human being from scratch. It's a tenuous and tortured analogy, but stick with it for what it is. All right, so now we'll take this and we'll add in all the code that we have. We'll briefly review this code. There's not a lot to it, which is nice because this is oh boy. Alrighty, let's try that again. This might be the toughest part of the whole exercise. Oh boy. Pardon me. All right, so we're going to grab that and we're going to take it and we're going to paste it in there. And we'll do our trick again, Control A, and format everything, see if we messed up. And this way you can identify errors like, for example, I have this extra parentheses I'd put in. So let me hose that. Oh, and also when we pasted it, it's complaining over here because it didn't quite add the new lines correctly. There we go. That should be an inner class. We're going to talk about that. So maybe that wasn't an extra one. There we go. We didn't have an extra one. Let's source format again. Okay. And this matches the opening class. Yeah, when you put your cursor at one of these braces, it matches, it highlights the matching brace, as you can see. All right, so far so good. So now it's complaining about a couple of things. Let's see what it's complaining about. Final field joke can be final. Well, maybe not. Let's go back to vote counter itself. And now what is this guy saying? So at least the error is gone that it doesn't understand what vote counter panel is. The reason that it's gone is because both vote counter and vote counter panel live in the same package, test lab 5. Because they live in the same package, they're aware of all the other classes that live inside that folder or that package. And that's what we have over here. So let's make sure things run first of all. Let's see if it's going to give us some kind of error. Let's compile. That's one of the sanity checks that we want to do, fix any errors that we have. And if there don't seem to be any errors. But right now it's running, it doesn't do anything because it's running this main method, which was in that test5.java. So we need to tell the project, when I click the play button, I want you to go and run a specific main class. So I go to project properties, run, and then the main class should not be test lab 5, it should be vote counter. And so I'll say okay. Once I've done that, now I can hit play, it'll compile the class. Oh, and there it is. Hey, and it's functional. Vote for Joe, the button works, everything's functional. How is it functional? Let's go back and see. So here's our vote counter class. This is our main application class because it has the main method. Now all our errors have gone away. And what it does is it basically creates a new frame, just like the window frame. And then it creates a new vote counter panel. Remember, that's like the invisible glass pane. And on that invisible glass pane are stuck some screen element components or objects. It takes that new vote counter panel that it creates and adds it to the pane, the main content pane of that frame. Once it's added it on there, it just makes it visible. So all the magic really happens in vote counter panel. So let's look at what exactly is happening in vote counter panel. Pardon me. So in vote counter panel, one of the first things that we're doing is we're creating 3 instance variables or fields. Remember, these are variables like votes for Joe, which is an int variable, Joe, which is a JButton variable, and label Joe, which is a JLabel variable. We create all 3 of these variables inside the class, but outside of any methods. Because we create these variables inside the class but outside any methods, these variables are global in a sense to the class. And every method in that class is aware and can access these variables. And so these variables are called instance variables or fields. And one of the first methods that we create is the constructor. Because whenever you have a new class and you want to create or construct new objects of that class type, you should probably define a constructor, which says exactly what it means to create a new object of that type. Pardon me. All right. So in this case, what the constructor does is it initializes vote for Joe. That's the integer, sets it to 0. This is going to be keeping track of how many votes there are for Joe, how many times that button is clicked. Then all we did over here was declare the Joe variable. We didn't actually create the new object. And so this is where we create the new JButton object called vote for Joe. This is analogous to that video that we saw. Once we've done that, we need to say, okay, we've created the button, and then we can add that button, add Joe, onto the vote counter panel. Because it extends JPanel, it understands what the add method does. So the add method takes that component, in this case the screen element component, which is a JButton, and adds it to the JPanel. The JPanel in this case is vote counter panel. Once you've added it, or even in this case before we've added it, one of the things we need to do is all it'll do is put it on there. When you click it, nothing will happen. In order to have something happen, you need to add an action listener to that button. So the JButton has a built-in method called addActionListener, and what that does is it registers a new listener object with that button. Remember, we said in the standard model of GUI development in Java, there are 3 main elements: components, events, and listeners. So in this case, we're creating a new listener. The particular new listener we created is Joe Button Listener. Once we've created the listener doesn't know what to listen for. So we connect the new listener to the button that we want it to listen for. Now, whenever an action event occurs, whenever someone clicks that button, the listener will jump into action and carry out some action that we define. What action is it? Well, we define that by creating a new inner class called Joe Button Listener, which implements another class. In this case, it's an interface class called Action Listener. So this is an example of creating a class inside a class. And we can do that amazingly enough in Java. And the interface class, as I'd mentioned last time, is basically a class that says what things should do, not how they should do them. So it says if you want to be a listener class, maybe a class that's called Joe Button Listener, that's fine. You can implement me. You can be an action listener class. But what you have to do is you have to provide some functionality in the action performed method. And the argument to the action performed method is an event object called event. We can call it whatever we want. So these are the three elements. You've got events, an event object. You've got a new listener, and you've got a new component. These are the three elements. When you hook them together, you suddenly have magic. And all that the action performed method of the action listener class does is it increments votes for Joe. Because votes for Joe was declared as an instance variable or field, that means it was a variable that was declared inside the class, but outside of any method. It's available to all methods and elements of the class, including this action performed method. It knows what votes for Joe is, and it can change it and modify it if it's allowed to. So it does that. It changes it. Once it's changed it, it also knows label Joe, because label Joe is also an instance variable or field. It's a variable that's declared inside the class but outside of any method. So all the elements of the class automatically know about label Joe. And that's what we take advantage of here. We tell the label Joe object to set its text. And we say set your text to this new string and add the number of votes. And that's it. And when we click it, we run it. And when we run it, we've got votes for Joe, which we can increment. And this is what we expand with our functionality. So the next thing that you're going to do is expand what we've probably already done it. So best of luck with that. What I'm going to do is, this really bothers me, I'm going to just put that in there. I wish this thing would indent the comments when you do the format code, but we have to do that part manually. And so here we go. We've got nicely formatted code, and we've got a fully functional minimal GUI class. This is the GUI class, which extends or inherits from JPanel, and we take that vote counter panel and we create an object of that type in our driver class. And once we've created that new vote counter panel, which is really just a JPanel, we add that to the content pane of our main frame. And then we just tell the frame, show yourself. We can also do things like set its height, set its width. We can set its dimensions. We don't bother doing that. One thing I should note is that you should definitely add the set default close operation with this exit on close. Otherwise, when you click the little X on the window, it won't actually go away. And you'll have to kill it in Task Manager or your Process Manager, depending on the operating system that you have. All right, I hope that helps. Best of luck. I'll follow up separately. Bye-bye.